Shane Sams here. So glad to be back with you again today to talk about storytelling, to talk about business, to talk about life. And the topic for today is one near and dear to my heart. It is storytelling. People ask me all the time, Shane, what's the secret to your success? Like, how did you become a speaker? How did you become an author? How did you become a coach? How did your podcast do well? Like, how did all of these things happen? It's like lightning in a bottle and it keeps on striking. You know what I'm saying? And I always tell them the same exact thing. I learned early on that I needed to tell my story, not my whole life story. Nobody needs to know what I ate for breakfast in third grade, but the story that matters most to my avatar and the people that I'm talking to, the people in the audience, the people who I want to adopt my ideas, the people who I want to buy my offers. Your story is the most important asset in your entire business. And if you get it right, that's going to be a catalyst for all the success of whatever your goals are. It's the story of your business, the story of your brand, the part of the life that drives all of your mission and purpose. If you can dial in this story, the most important asset that you own, that your buildings and your websites and all that don't matter if you don't get the story right. The story clarifies your offer so your audience can see what you're selling. They can see what you're saying. They can hear what you're trying to accomplish. It zooms in on your avatar. Once you get your story right and you see an audience, you see people reacting to that story, you know exactly who you're trying to sell something to. It makes marketing and sales easier when you clearly know and you can go out and articulate your story. It makes all of your marketing decisions easier. It makes sales easier. It clarifies all of your mission and purpose for your team. When your team really knows your story, they can help drive your business and your career forward. One of the first things that we do whenever we hire someone in our company is we give them podcast recordings that clearly tell our story from the beginning of how we became entrepreneurs and speakers and how I got to be on stages and got to be on podcasts and got to do all the cool things, because we want to catch them up on the story that our customers are going to hear so that our customers will know exactly what they're doing when they go and buy our products. Your story is everything if you want to sell online or in person. And you are always selling something. Now, there might be some people listening out there that are just speakers or authors, and they're like, well, I'm not really selling anything. I'm just going out and delivering a message. You're selling the idea. You don't want your audience to just listen in and then tune out and forget everything that you said. You're trying to sell them on your idea, on your mission, on your morals, on your purpose, so that they will go out and they'll take action and make impact in their life. If you're teaching something, whether it's a corporate boardroom or on a stage or on a webinar or on a course, you're selling that lesson, the information that you're teaching. And if you have a product or a service online, you better get your story right, or nobody's going to buy anything. They don't care about the benefits and the bells and the whistles. They really don't even care about the result until they see you or someone else, maybe it's your customers, your testimonials, in a story actually get the results that you offer. So you've got to be able to get that story right. A lot of people make a mistake when they're selling or when they're speaking, and they're just trying to preach. They're trying to tell everybody what they know. They're trying to say, you should do this. And all that does is that gives people a lot of facts. That gives people a lot of information, but they're not going to do anything with it. Stories drive emotions. We are hardwired as humans to learn through stories. We tell our kids bedtime stories. We tell stories around the campfire. Why do we do that? Because stories trigger emotions, and emotions are what trigger buying actions or adopting ideas, right? Stories are what entertain us enough so that when we get to the teaching, when we get to the lesson, we're dialed in so we learn. Think about the Bible and the parables. Jesus would always go out and teach people stuff, right? He would teach people stuff. He would tell them these great parables, these stories, and they'd be like, whoa, that was super interesting. I think there's something important there. Could you explain that to us? Think about any great speaker you've ever heard, right? Tony Robbins gets on stage and he tells all these amazing stories. He goes into the crowd and pulls the story out of the audience, and those stories set him up to earn the right to tell people what to do. The emotions and the desire and the journey that got you to your product and your service and your offers, if you can trigger those emotions with great stories and everything that you do, people are much more likely to go get their wallet and go buy your stuff, because that you've triggered the emotions in them that will finally get them to take action. Most people, I was a school teacher for 10 years. I taught hundreds of kids, right? And then I've been a podcaster and a speaker and a teacher for the last decade. And I've talked to literally tens of thousands of people, right? And what I find no matter who I'm teaching, all the way from ninth grade to 90-year-old people, is a lot of people have the facts already. They know what to do, but they're just waiting for that emotional trigger, that motivation through some great story, a story that could be theirs if they would just reach out and grab it, to actually drive them into action. So you can tell people all you want. You can tell them all the facts in the world, but without a great story, without that emotion behind it, people aren't going to listen and do what you want them to do. The worst thing you can do is start teaching out of the gate. The worst thing you can do is start spotlighting bells and whistles. The story has to be told first. In any business, in any brand, for any influencer, for any speaker, for any author, for any coach, for any content creator, for any entrepreneur, dialing in your story will clarify where you came from, what you do, and what your vision is for the future of your audience. The story is everything. Now, again, I'm not talking about just any old story. This is not your full life story. Mark Twain said, "I would have wrote you a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time." The editing of your life is what's critical for storytelling. You know, when you walk up on stage, you may only have 20 to 30 minutes to say what you want to say. When you're on a webinar, you've got 45 minutes to convince people to buy your product. Weekly on your podcast, YouTube shorts. Everybody's got so much ADD now with all the YouTube shorts and Instagram reels. You don't have time to tell everything in your life. This slice of life that you need, we call a story pitch. This is the story from your grand narrative of your life that you must tell quickly and clearly to the audience if you want them to take action that you want. You're always pitching something. Your story pitch has to be dialed in on the exact moment in time that your audience needs to hear to go out and do what you want them to do. You know, when you start a book or you start a movie, the characters already existed in that movie. They had a whole life before them leading up to that moment for that first scene or that first page in the book. When you open the prologue, the character already exists. And when you finish a book, those characters will live on and they're going to go out and they're going to do other things that you don't even read about. The same thing is true with your story pitch. Whenever you're doing something in business as an entrepreneur, online or offline on a stage, you've got to pick the right part of your story that gets the action that you want, especially if you're selling something for money. And once you find that story pitch, you find that slice of your life that gets the results that you want, you've got to take that story on the road everywhere you go. You know, I've spoken to literally tens of thousands of people live on stages all across America, and I've made millions of dollars in sales online and offline. My story has literally been heard millions of times on podcasts. We have over 3 million downloads on all of our podcasts, in articles like Forbes, and me being a guest on other people's shows, on webinars, interviews. I've been telling the same one story, my story pitch, over the past 12 years. And everywhere I go, I tell that story the same way. Do I add a little element of it every time I go into a new city? Do I add a joke? Do I take something out? Do I polish it all the time and I keep improving that story? Yes. But I know that the one thing I can do every single day is go out and tell that one story, my company's greatest asset, because it gets my audience to take the actions that I want. So I'm going to unpack the story pitch process today, give you a little masterclass on storytelling in a very simple way to help you start thinking about the story that you need to tell on your podcast, on your stages, in your books, in your webinars, wherever you're telling your story at. Because if you can master a story pitch, if you can truly master telling your story, you're going to make a big impact on your audience and you're going to make more sales anywhere you go. Now, the entire story pitch process covers a lot of different things: opening the talk, permissions you need from the audience, a lot of tips and tactics, getting a yes at the end of a story pitch, and of course, how to stack a pitch, how to really make your offer known and clear at the end of your talk. But today, I'm just going to focus on the story element in story pitch and teach you the framework that I use to tell my story, the same framework that I use to structure all of my podcasts, to interview anybody. Whenever I write an email, I start with this exact framework every time I tell any story, whether it's my story, a customer testimonial, or something about my brand. This framework that I use, I've developed after studying storytelling at a deep level in dozens and dozens of books, interviewing over 1,000 people on my own podcast, and speaking on stages and webinars all over the world. And this will help you start organizing your story pitch in a very simple way so you can turn your story into a career-defining asset and presentation for your business or for your career as a speaker. Now, some of you may have heard my story before. I'm not going to tell the entire presentation right here today. We can drop some links in the show note, or you can go over to shanesams.com and you can find places where I've actually told that story on stage if you want to see me do the whole thing. But I am going to use elements of my story to break it down and kind of give you an example of how you can use this to tell your story too. All right, whenever you're telling a story, you've got to set the stage. I call this section the prologue. You've got to give people just enough information to get them caught up with where the story begins. They're not going to know your entire life history. They don't need to know your entire life history. Sometimes this can be done in a presentation or a talk or when you're being interviewed on another podcast. You can do this in 1 or 2 sentences. It's the first scene of the movie. It's the first page of the book, just to let people know where we're at and what the setting is for this story itself. Now, before I became a speaker and an entrepreneur, I used to be a school teacher in Southeast Kentucky. And that is the first line that I use on stage, on a guest interview, in a webinar, whenever I'm telling my story. I usually say it like this. All right, y'all, some years ago, I was a school teacher in Southeast Kentucky. And that just sets the stage. The people can fill in the gaps with their imagination. This guy's a school teacher. He's a big jock-looking dude. He's probably a football coach. He's in Southeast Kentucky. This must be a rural town. I'm just trying to get them into the story. I always tell people it's like Wayne's World. Y'all remember Wayne's World? I might date myself here in a little bit. But Wayne's World and SNL, whenever they would have a memory, they would go, diddle-la, 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 and the screen would get wavy, and they would go back in time, and it would be younger Wayne and Garth. I think that was their names, Wayne and Garth, right? From Wayne's World from Saturday Night Live. That's what we're doing right now. It's just the diddle-la, diddle-la. We got to take you out of the stage, out of the audience, out of the wherever you're at. We got to transport you to the story. So use a little prologue just to give them enough background information so that you can get them into the story. After we handle the prologue, we need a once upon a time. Now, the once upon a time is going to take them to the exact moment where the story starts. This is where other characters are going to appear. There's going to be dialogue as you tell the story and make it a richer thing. But this is putting them in a moment in time. So my story starts whenever I'm on stage. When I was a school teacher in Southeast Kentucky, I used to have to take my kids to daycare every day, like a lot of working families. And one cold winter morning in Kentucky, I was in the parking lot of my son's daycare center, and he was fighting me tooth and nail to get out of that car seat. So you can see, I've totally told them, I put them exactly where I want them. This is where the story starts. My story starts at becoming an entrepreneur, becoming a speaker, becoming who I am today, in that moment, in that exact parking lot. And I'm using descriptive language there. It's a cold winter morning, right? I'm in a parking lot of a daycare center. My son's in a puffy coat, and I was fighting with him and wrestling with him, and I couldn't get him out of the car seat. You can visually see exactly what's happening. Picking the start of your story is actually the hardest part. Sometimes you got to sift through all the different, parts. You might want to work from the ending backwards to find the place where we need to begin. I could start this in a couple different places. I could start it, at football practice when I was football coaching. I could start it at home, sitting around the kitchen table with my wife. But for this story, and you'll see why in just a second, I chose this parking lot this morning so that everyone knew exactly what was happening. Now, all great stories start with a problem. If you don't have a problem to solve, there's no drama. There's no action. There's no reason to go out and do everything. Many times your audience, you're going to be speaking to a specific avatar with a specific problem. It may not be exactly like yours, but if we can frame the problem appearing in our life correctly, that's going to give us momentum, a catalyst to go out and tell the story and get them to the end of the story where we're going to pitch our product or service. In my story, here's what happened. I was fighting my son tooth and nail, trying to get him out of the car seat. And he kept saying, no, daddy, I want to stay with daddy today. And I said, son, I got to get to work. I'm never late for work. I'm always on time. We got to go. And my son said, no, daddy, I want to stay with daddy today. And I said, son, I teach high school juniors. They will burn down the building or start making babies if there's not adult supervision in that room. I got to go. And he said, no, daddy, she scares me. And I paused. And I said, who scares you? And my son told me the name of one of the workers in his daycare center. And I said, why does she scare you? And he told me, she locks me in the bathroom, daddy, and turns out the lights. Now, this is an actual thing that happened in my story. I was trying to get to work one day, and my son told me that someone in his daycare center scared him. After an investigation, we found out that there was a lot of violence going on in this daycare center. They were actually locking my son in a bathroom to punish him for potty training accidents. Now, I'm not going to go into the full-blown part of the story here, but on that day, I also went into work, and I needed the day off work to investigate the situation, but it was too late to get a sub. And my boss told me, literally said this to me, I know your son needs you, but your job needs you too, and you're going to have to handle your personal problems after work. Now, I have framed the catalyst, the problem that appeared in my life, a problem that had to be solved. This can't be a simple thing, right? It's got to be something with a pain point behind it. This was a big pain for me. And I remember that problem was so deep in my life. I was like, man, this person signs my checks. They tell me what to do. I talk about in the story the anger I felt at myself for putting myself in this situation where I signed a contract where somebody could tell me, no, you can't be there for your son. And all great problems go to the next section of a great story pitch. So I decided. There has to be a moment where you model decision making. Remember, at the end of every talk, every story pitch, you at least want them to adopt your ideas. You want them to follow you online. You want them to connect with you. You want them to buy your product. So in your story, you have to model making a huge decision, one with risk, one that could fail, to inspire your audience to make decisions later in the show. Now, I decided that day to walk out of my boss's office. I walked out and I got in my car and I went home to my child. I thought I was going to get fired. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I made that decision to hell with the consequences. After the problem appears, you got to make a decision to go solve the problem. Maybe you're somebody that teaches people how to lose weight. And maybe that's a part of your story. You lost weight and got into shape. You've got to talk about the decision before you talk about the action. The problem is going to appear, then you decide to solve it, and then all the action starts from there. This happens all the time in great movies. Think about Lord of the Rings. They had to decide to be the Fellowship of the Ring and leave the Shire and go toward the mountain and save all the world or whatever. It happens in Star Wars. They got to get on a spaceship and they got to fly off Tatooine, right? There's a great movie called Glory. It's about the first black regiment in the Civil War. And someone had to make a decision to form that regiment and who was going to be in charge of it to set up all the action that was going to happen later. You can bring just as much drama to the stage, to the webinar, to your podcast, to your interviews, to your talks, if you really hammer home that you made a decision to make a change and overcome the problem. Now, the decision that I make in my story is I decided that I would never work for anyone again. I would find a way to start a business, become an entrepreneur, do something where I would get to sign my own checks. Now, once I've made that decision, I've got to take action. All right. And a great story is going to be a series of actions and results. Actions and consequences. We want as much action to drive the story forward as possible. So the first action that you're going to talk about in your story is often a failure. It's really good to show failure in all of your storytelling. People don't want Superman. They don't want the guy that has X-ray vision and nobody can hurt him and he can't even bleed. Superman was a really boring, failed comic book until they released the episode with kryptonite in it. You need to show your failures. You need to be real. You need to let people know you're not special. You're not a super person. Because if you're special and you're a super person, I can't do what you sell. I can't buy your product. Why would I accept your ideas when you're clearly someone special and aloof from the rest of humanity levitating above us, right? Don't make yourself out to be a perfect hero. You want to show your failures. In my story, the first thing I tried to do, I was going to be like a handyman and like a building inspector. But the problem is I'm not very handy and I didn't even own tools. My wife was going to kill me when I was out trying to buy hammers and tool belts and toolboxes. And I was like, I'm going to go be a home inspector. She's like, you don't even know barely where our home is. You can't even get home every day. What are you talking about? By showing that I tried things and failed, but I didn't give up, I'm able to drive people forward, and maybe they've had some hard times in their life. They've had some failures. They can now relate to me better in the story. It's also a great chance to show some humor and create some emotion early on in your story pitch. Action number 2 is often involving a search, going out and looking for more information to try to achieve the goal you want. My goal was to start an online business, start an offline business, start anything I could so that I could be an entrepreneur, work for myself, set my own schedule, get to a place where my family needed me the most. In the second action of a story pitch, often a mentor is going to show up. Now, when you're positioning a mentor or someone you've learned from, it has to be how inaccessible to the people in your audience. Because if they can just go to the mentor, why would they go to you, right? The mentor is Yoda. The mentor is Obi-Wan Kenobi. The mentor is Gandalf. This doesn't have to be somebody you actually worked with or that you knew, right? It could be someone you read a book about. It could be somebody you heard on a podcast, somebody you followed online. But it's really good to position a mentor, especially if it's a known figure in your space, someone that you have access to that the audience doesn't. And then it'll make sense that you didn't just stumble and luckily figure anything out. You learned true frameworks, true techniques from a master. And now you're the master and you're the one that's going to pass it on to the audience. In my story, I was riding on a lawnmower one day and I was listening to podcasts. And I found this podcast by a guy named Pat Flynn. It was called Smart Passive Income. And I heard him talk about making money online. You could do it in a lot of ways. You could have a niche website where people click links and you get ad commissions, or you could even sell your own products. And I emailed Pat and I got to talk to Pat, and he really became one of my mentors, and he kind of helped me through that first little hurdles, first little part of my journey on my way to being an online entrepreneur. By taking action and seeking out mentors, you can position yourself, you can model the customer in the audience coming to you for help. This works especially good if you're selling coaching or if you're selling courses or you're building communities online. Show people that you invested. Show people that you went out and you put your money and your time where your mouth was. And if you do that, they will see you as the mentor at the end that they can go to and get the support that they need. Now, after you find the mentor, after you find you're taking action, you start putting together a plan. But like the great Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. The next series of actions, it can be one more action, two more actions, three more, as long as the story takes, are going to be you trying to implement the plan that you learned from the mentor and that you created on your own. There's going to be obstacles pop up. You're going to fail again. There's going to be challenges. There's going to be roadblocks, struggles. This is where we create a ton of drama. Like, man, this is going to be hard. This person's already went through all of the starts and stops. They've tried the trial and error, and somehow they made it on the other side. This is also the section of a story pitch where you're handling objections. People are going to have fears. That's internal things that hold them back. They're going to have objections and obstacles. That's external things they think are in their way. You're going to show them how to knock down those fears and obstacles and objections through the story. We're not going to overtly say, hey, you're not motivated. We're going to tell them and show them when you weren't motivated but did the work anyway. And by using storytelling, we can help them see there is a path for me. I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to worry about the obstacles. The person on stage that's telling me this story is the mentor I've been looking for. This is the speaker I want to follow and adopt their ideas. This is the entrepreneur that knows how to get me what I want. This is the coach that I need to take me to the next level. And as we go through these fears, obstacles, and objections, as we keep taking these actions, right? A problem appears. You decided to do something about it. Because of that, you took action and you failed. Because of that, you took more action and you finally found a mentor. Because of that, you took action on the plan and you hit roadblocks, you hit stumbles, you hit fears, but you kept overcoming them along the way. You're going to get to a point where you finally succeed. Like many stories, we're going to create some tension right before that kind of puts the outcome a little bit in doubt. And then we're going to tell them about your success and how it changed you, changed your worldview, changed your life, gave you a mission, gave you a purpose, help you come up with an offer that you're selling. And when we show them your success, then we're going to pivot into a very important part that's really important for anybody that's trying to do anything in persuasion. I don't care if you're a keynote speaker up there sharing your ideas, or if you're somebody that sells on webinars and stages, or even in one-on-one sales calls. We want to go from your success and immediately turn the spotlight onto your testimonials and your customers. Who have you helped to? I like to think of speakers, authors, coaches, and entrepreneurs, influencers who are creating content on the world, people like you. I like to think about us like we're a lighthouse, right? Now, at first you see the lighthouse out in the distance, you see the fire rising up, and it's on the big rock and it's up in the sky and the light is shining, right? But that lighthouse is spinning. It's not just there for you to see the lighthouse, it's illuminating all the other things around it. You're the lighthouse for your ideas. You're the lighthouse for your business. You're the lighthouse for your customers. The goal is not to go to the lighthouse necessarily, it's to come up on shore. It's to safely make it to where you are. You need to show yourself guiding other people in the same way. You can tell anecdotes about your testimonials. The story that I tell on stage here is the first person we ever helped to start an online business. Their name was JT and Lindsay. They were friends of ours that we knew in town. They saw us create a successful business to quit our jobs. And once they saw us do that, they asked if we could help them do it too. And we did. And once we helped them, we realized we could teach our methods for starting online businesses to other people. So then I'll share a couple more quick anecdotes about people that I've helped do the same thing. And we're going to follow the same process in a quicker way with that person. We're going to talk about their problems, their solutions, their decisions, their actions that they took, and most importantly, the results they got from whatever it is we sell. And once we've given them enough evidence, enough stories, enough emotion and desire to bring them back to where we are today, we're going to start doing the diddle thing, and we're going to talk about the happily ever after. We're going to come to the present day, back on stage. And that's why I'm here to help you too. And then we're going to make our offer with our ideas, with our products, with our services, so that they are the next people. The audience right there that just heard you tell your story pitch is going to be the audience that you're going to help next. This is the simple way that I tell all my stories, all my testimonials. If I'm making a sales page, I pull up this script. If I'm writing an email, I pull up this script. If I'm doing a 45-minute presentation at the LA Convention Center in front of 10,000 people, I follow this script. If I'm in an elevator and I got 2 minutes to talk to somebody to tell them my story real quick, I talk about this script. If I'm on a podcast and it's a 15-minute interview, I follow this script so that I can make sure I'm telling stories in the most persuasive way possible. There's a prologue that sets up the background. Once upon a time, where does the story start? A problem appears, and it's a big one that I have to solve. So I decided to solve the problem. Always show yourself making the decision. Because of that, I took action. And yeah, I failed sometimes, but I got back on the horse. And because of that, I took more action, and I went out and I started learning and gathering knowledge, and I found a mentor. Because of that, I took action. I made a plan, but all plans aren't foolproof. So there were obstacles and fears and challenges that created tension in my story. I didn't know if I would succeed until finally I got the result that I wanted, and I perfected it, and I made it my own, and I learned it so well. Then I helped others to get the same results that I did. And now that's my mission and purpose. I'm living happily ever after, and I want to help you next, with a finger pointing right toward the crowd. The story pitch framework that I just gave you is simple, it's persuasive, and it gets the audience to take action. It's a tool that you can use to make sure your ideas get across, to make sure there's a line at the end of the stage waiting for you when you're done, or to make sure that people click that link in the webinar chat so they buy your products and services on your next webinar or sales event. All right, guys, that's all we got for today. If you would like to learn more about the story pitch process, head over to shanesams.com. Over on my website, we help speakers, authors, coaches, and entrepreneurs create career-defining presentations. We call that Story Pitch. Story Pitch helps you create a world-class presentation and story for stages, webinars, sales pages. It's a unique process that I have developed through over a decade of trial and error, hundreds of podcasts, talking to tens of thousands of people all across the world. We have an elite team of master storytellers, creators, and supporters. Our goal is to move the masses and help you make a big impact and more sales. So if you want some resources, if you want some more stuff on how you can tell great stories, how you can create the most important asset in your business, a story pitch, you can do that over at shanesams.com. That's all the time we've got for this week's show. I'll be back with you next time. Until I see you again, go light it up. We'll talk to you soon.